In this video, we're going to take a look at using simple deforms in Toon Boom Harmony Premium. So Premium has better deforms than the other versions of Harmony, and that is one of the things that we like about it. In addition to being able to work in the node view, we get access to more deforms. So you may be wondering, okay, where do I do it, and what is a deform, and how does it work? So we've got some artwork here that we're going to work with so we can understand a little bit about it. There are a couple types of deforms. So we have our rigging tool, because this is where we do the rigging to create the deforms. So I click on the rigging tool on the little hammer icon, and we have a couple of options here. We have curve mode, we have envelope mode. Those are the two that we're going to look at in this video. We're not going to look at freeform or game bone modes. So first we're going to just start out with the curve mode. Now when we work with a curve deformer, so I'm going to select the layer I'm working with, and it will be this tentacle. What we can do is click to insert the first point. Now as we go and click, we'll notice it is creating this curve, and it has handles on it. Now if I click again, we can see, so what we do is we pull backwards, we pull down as we're drawing to insert these points. Now let's go back and start over on it. So first what I'm going to do is click and pull back to create that first point, click and pull back to create another point, and it is a little bit hard to see when we first start out because it's the red on the pink. And now I insert my next curve and my final one. So what I don't want to do is be dragging upward, because it will create that extra bend in my rig there. Now if I grab the transform tool, this is where we can start animating it. Now when we're working, if we have our options of show or hide control, the little lines with the hashes on it, if we click so there's no deformer on screen, and we're like, okay, I want to work with the deformer here, and I will notice that it added this deformer inside my node view, and if we open it up, we will see that it is a series of curves and an offset. So I look, I'm like, okay, so where is that? So when I have something selected that I'm working with, if I want to see the deformer on that object, up in my rigging toolbar, I have an option to show the current deformer that I'm working with. And now if I click off, it's there, it shows up in green. We can also, when it is selected, there's a keyboard shortcut for it that my brain just escaped on as we're working. Now, normally we don't want too many deformers going, because if we have a character that has a deformer on every single drawing layer, which is on most rig characters what you do, pretty soon if all your deformers are on, it gets a little bit hard to look at. So we'll see, we have an option here on show selected deformers or show the current deformer and hide all the others. So often you might click on the one that has the two circles and lines on it to show a couple of them. So maybe you're just working on deforming the arm, so you'll do that, and then when you're done you click and say hide controls. So now with this active here, so this particular tentacle, we can look at it, it is the middle one. I'm going to insert a keyframe here. I'll say it's a motion keyframe. I'm going to go over a few frames, and we can see what happens when I want to animate with this, that it now allows me to move and change, and we can see how that deform is going. Now the thing about working with deformers is, and if we grab that, it rotates it, but when we work with deformers, if we animate a lot or our artwork has complex fills on it and we start doing a lot of deforming, we'll see how we get some pretty ugly things happening. So we have to be careful with that. Now I'm noticing I don't like what's happening down here at the bottom, so I'm going to just take that deform and delete it and go and make a new one. So with that, selected, I will click and pull down. Now what we don't want to do is to insert too many points into our deformer while we are working, because if we do that, if we put too many points in, then it starts to break it. So what I'm going to do is move. So again, if we go too far, we can see the deformer break. So if we go a little bit, we'll see. Let's turn on motion now. And forgot to set the keyframe at the beginning after undoing and deleting the deformer. So let's fix that. So what we can do is we can just delete this keyframe. So I'll delete that keyframe, so we're back to our starting pose. So now insert a keyframe for pose 1. Now I'm going to go over here and pull this out a little bit, pull this out, do a little rotate. And now we have our two poses. It's now motion. So we can see how we've created that motion. Now if I want to reverse that, I'm going to pull that over, shrink it up a little bit, and again turn it to a motion. So while I'm doing this, I might want to turn off stop motion keyframes, because I know I want these to be tweening. Now if I want to return back to my initial position, well, we can copy a keyframe, so I'll click there, paste that in. Now if I watch the sequence here, here, and let's turn that into a motion keyframe, and it plays. So now if we just set that on loop and hit play and set our scene length, or stop, now we can see. So we're able to create some of these kind of organic deforming animations quite handily. And the curved deformer works well when you're just doing something that is linear, a blade of grass, a branch on a tree, a lock of hair. So you have, like, you know, a big pointer piece of hair sticking out, and you just want to simply animate it, and you don't need to completely and dramatically change its shape. It works really well for that. But when you have fills on things, it can get a little bit messed up and a little more difficult to deal with. So now we're going to take a look at the other type of fill, and this fill is going to be, not fill, I mean envelope, or other type of deform. Now when we do the next type of deform, the way that this works on it, it's going to be similar, is we're creating an envelope around what we're working on. Now when something has artwork inside of it like this, it tends to break quite a bit. So I'm going to demonstrate why it's not necessarily the best type of item for this. So when we're doing this, we're creating a continuous curve around this shape. So I'm going to click and drag. So when we create the curve deformer, we click and then we click drag, pulling backwards. So now, but on an envelope, I click and drag. Now we kind of go and add points for every corner. Now if I had too many points, my shape becomes hard to animate because I have to move so many handles. On something like this, I might just do kind of the corners, the middles of the corners, and the middle of the side. So I click and drag. Now see, if I pull up, we can see how the curve is going up. So I always pull back. So now I pull back. Now I'm trying to get it as close to the edges as I can, but I don't need to be super perfect right now because we will clean it up. And now when it's time to close this, because we're creating an envelope, a complete thing, notice how my cursor has a plus with a C on it, indicating it will add a new point on my curve. But if I hold down the Alt or Option key, it now has a little circle when I'm over the starting point, and now it closed it. Now what I'm going to do is use the rigging tool and start fine-tuning the shape of this. So I can set this curve here. Now this curve here, I think I'm going to move it up a little bit and see how it's really bulging out. If I hold down the Alt or Option key and grab that handle right there, I notice I can turn my curve point into more of a corner, so I can create that bulge to line it up. Same thing down here as I shrink that up, so then the handle, that lined up pretty well. I got really lucky there. And that one's lining up. So now this corner here, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, move that over, pull this down. That's lining up decently. And I either need to have drawn it with an extra point, or we'll live with that. It's not perfectly aligned right there. So in a production rig for a character, your envelopes generally have to be right on the outside edges of the shape, so you do have to have enough points to do it, so that the animator is able to line things up as they need to. So now I'm going to put our stop here out back at 60. And now on this tentacle, I'm going to add in a starting keyframe right there. So now we know that position. Grab my transform tool. Now notice we see both of those. If I turn off controls, nothing's there with this selected. Click show controls. Now we can see the deform for that shape. So now if I want to deform this, we'll see how when we have a fill on something, suddenly, yeah, we get some weirdness happening. But if I want to do similar to what is happening in the other animation, we certainly can do that. Now if I wanted more bends, I probably should have added a few more points. Being a tentacle, curves work a little bit better on that. But let's try and line these so we're not breaking our shapes. So you can see if we pull too far, it does break things. So now I'll just commit on that keyframe, go to this first one, motion. So we can see how we're able to create that move. So if we run, so it's working. Now, what's going to really work better is when we have envelopes attached to our character. So when we're looking at the artwork for the character, that envelope is around the whole shape. So maybe on the shirt or for each limb, we had an envelope so that we can fully work on animating that character when we move into a pose. So we have a lot more flexibility if we want to do more exaggeration of pose, that we can do it. So again, to accomplish this, we need to select a rigging tool. Generally on a rig character, we're going to use an envelope deformer to make this happen, and then we will draw the envelope around the character. Parts. To better see the body parts, we're just going to jump into the node view, and I'm going to disable the auto patch on it, and I'm going to disable the lower leg. So I guess I could have left the auto patch on. We'll just disable some of these layers so we can see. And in this particular example, we're just going to work on adding in for the legs here to keep it simple. So with that leg, I'm going to grab my rigging tool and select that drawing layer, and now we can see the leg that is there. So again, we have a few options as you're going to work on drawing your envelope around this. Now, as I draw this envelope again, we go backwards. So we could just do it as 4 points. So I'm going to do that where I click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and then option click to close it. And now we can zooming in allows me to see that a little bit better, so I can set these points, lining them up. Now when we have the handles, in general, what we want is the two handles, each handle of this, and this curve is a Bezier curve, B-E-Z-I-E-R. The two handles should be approximately 1/3 the length of the total curve. So each handle is 1/3. We have 1/3 that's not being accounted for, and then we have the other third. And that typically gives you the ideal amount of control on your thing. Now, if you have too few points, you sometimes have to stretch your handles extra long to get them to line up with what you are trying to do. So now if I pull this in, we can see it pulls it out at the knee, but I'm going to be okay with that because I know that most of this is covered inside the auto patch, so I'm not too worried about that. And I'm using space to quickly navigate through, and if I hold down Alt or Option, notice, I can turn that into a corner point so I can better line those pieces up with it. So that gives me the first envelope that I need on this character. Now I'm going to select this leg. If I want to go find that over in the node view, I hold down O, and then because I selected it, so if I hold down Command or Control, it allows me to select a layer. So right now, whoop, don't want to do that. So go back to just our animation tool. So if I hold down Command or Control, it switches back to that selection. And now with that selected, I can hit O, and it centers my node view on that selection. But what I actually want is the upper leg here. Take the lower leg, temporarily turn that off. We already have the hips turned off. Going to select the torso here and go over here, hit D. D deactivates, and A will turn it back on. Or when it's selected, I can just click on the check mark or the X, so I can turn that off. I'm going to select this one, deselect that, just so I can better see the layer that I'm working with. So once again, go grab my rigging tool, and I am going to make sure that's selected once more, and now I can click and start drawing. I'll pull that handle back around. I pulled in the wrong direction. And Alt or Option click. Set these up. So when we have characters where the character artwork is semicircle or approximately that on the ends, and the limbs are general kind of sausage shaped, envelope deformers work really, really well. But when we end up with something, say more like the tentacles, it might not work quite as effective. Okay, so that gave me an upper leg. Just going to deactivate that, take the lower leg, activate that, go over here. We can see, I know about where it is, so I'm not going to worry too much about it, but if I wanted to, I certainly hold down Command or Control, click on the shoe, hit D, it goes away. And now click on the lower leg, and with that layer selected, we can work with the rigging tool to create our envelopes. So as I'm creating these envelopes, I'm doing these so that it gives me flexibility to adjust it. Now, actually, I'm going down the lower leg one. I'm going to add in a few more points. So this point is currently my active, so when I go again, we'll put one in the middle here as well. Then we'll go up toward the corner. Actually, and when we have a general kind of basic shape like this, it is useful to think about opposite points. So we're setting up these opposite points. And you'll notice if I have more points, it is a little bit easier to fine-tune the shape of this to line up with the rig. All right, now I'll just activate these layers again. And now Command click on that foot, center it over here, that brings me back. So leave the leg that off, deactivate, activate that. And with that layer active, I am going to this time start out inserting my points. So again, we don't, in Alt to close it, we don't have to be super precise when we're setting it up, because then you know you're going to go back to adjust that curvature to clean things up by adjusting it. But the closer you get on your first go, the less cleanup you have to do afterwards. So it is a trade-off, but I would encourage you to not get caught up in trying to be too exacting while you're setting it up. So active, active, so now those layers are active once more. And we go hide all of those. Now, let's go zoom back out. All right, we got to go pull back the torso, which is going to be over here. Set those layers active, so now they're all back. So if we go into the character here and we'll F6, create our first keyframe. So now I know my next pose, if I want to create a more exaggerated pose or interesting pose, because, oh, let's go back, peg selection mode was turned off, turn it back on. Now I can move his whole leg here, move that leg there. But if I want to adjust this, so I want to make this foot a little bit smaller. And now if I choose Show Deformer, what we'll see is we have access to this deformer that, well, I can adjust the position, but then I can click on individual points. So if I want to change this overall shape, so instead of just working with it as it was, what you'll see that we're able to do is now I can create a much more dynamic or dynamic, aesthetic, interesting. So I've now created a very different kind of shape in that pose. So if we do that as a full keyframe and turn on tweening, we can see how now that leg is bending, even though this leg is a cutout leg. So now we've bent that leg, And now if I move into my next pose, as I want to, we'll just grab this leg. Oh. So when we do things like this, we can sometimes adjust, bend, want to turn on onion skinning so I can see what's there. I'm just going to pull that one a little tighter for now. I'm just going to keep it tight. Makes it easier to see kind of the position. So I'm trying to get that rotation back to it. And now I'm going to bend that down there. Adjust that. And once again, show deformers here. So if you notice on this, well, I have more finesse and control with how this is bending by having the additional points. It's going to require more work on my part to line it up. If I want to see both deformers, so I click on the multi versus the single show deformer, then that shows. So now we're adjusting the angles here, trying to line it up. And now I just want to see the one because the other one was kind of interfering a little bit with me. Hide my deformer. So turn this into a motion keyframe. Make this a full keyframe. Space it out a few frames. Turn off onion skinning. So you'll see how we're able to move and create very different kind of animation, even though we're still doing, it's a rigged character. So if I go out for my next pose and want to pose this, I can now click on this and let's try again and move it. Now this being said, what I've shown here, it's decidedly easier to first position all of your poses just moving the basic rig, move all your cutout layers, and then go back and start tweaking and adjusting your deforms. Because if you, so now if I want to shrink this up, we'll see how it's shrinking all the way that way. But what I really want to do is I'm going to straighten it. Click off, click on, and notice how it now straightened the shape. So now I can adjust the shape a little bit. So we first adjust everything, just cut out, and then we'll go back. Actually, I want to make it a little wider. I need to clean up. So I'm going to be adjusting and resetting my deform. But when we're moving things around, it's generally going to be a lot easier when you're trying to shrink something or lengthen it to keep it vertical like this. Notice it's going based on that registration point. And now that I've done that, now I'm going to rotate it. And if I want to add some curve back into it again, I certainly can. Part of this is I didn't really plan out what my movement or animation was going to be. with it. And we can see when our stroke is bigger, the deforms do cause some unusual scaling, which this is part of why in cutout animation using a heavy use of deforms, it is generally going to be preferred that our line is not even at 5 but is even closer to like 2.5 is a common, well, don't want to be actually drawing here, but it's a common size that we're working with now, which is a much smaller line weight. So instead of the fatter line. But I hope that what you can see from here is that we can use our deforms to help add a richness and a creativity to it. So I mean, the shape of that, more of a spaghetti leg, is something that we would see if it was even hand drawn, and yet that's a rigged shape. So when you build your artwork, you commonly will be using hands and feet with a lot of drawing swaps. The feet may have a deform built into it, but then every other part is going to be featuring a deform on it so that you have that flexibility of how to change it over time. Good luck and have fun.